A while back, I reviewed the EpoMaker RT100, a fun 1800 layout keyboard with retro styling, an optional color LCD screen shaped like a tiny TV, and a nice stock sound. In this video, we're taking a look at its smaller sibling, the RT65. So if the bigger layout didn't appeal to you, but the little TV did, maybe this one's for you. Before we dive in, I want to mention that EpoMaker sent me the RT65 for the purpose of reviewing it. I was not paid to make this video, and EpoMaker has no input on my review. I do have an affiliate link in the description for you if you're interested in picking up the RT65 and you'd like to support this channel. The RT65 here has very similar styling to the RT100 with just a couple of differences. One difference is that in place of the knob, we have a joystick here, which actually can move your mouse cursor around. If you hold down function and press the joystick, it goes into a cursor mode, which is pretty interesting. Let's start with a review of the features and specs of the RT65, then we'll do our sound test and talk pros and cons. The RT65 is a 65% keyboard with 67 keys, a joystick, and an ANSI layout. It also includes an optional color LCD screen that attaches on the rear left of the keyboard. The case is ABS plastic, and color options include retro white and pink. The dimensions are 332.8 by 130.5 millimeters, with a front height of 21 millimeters and a rear height of 33 millimeters, not including the keycaps. The weight is 670 grams or 1.47 pounds. Connectivity includes Bluetooth for 3 devices with 125 Hz polling, 2.4 GHz with 1000 Hz polling, and USB-C wired also with 1000 Hz polling. When the power switch is in the on position, the wireless connections are switched with key commands. The battery capacity is 3000 mAh, and EpoMaker does not provide an estimated use time on their website. Internal components include a hot swappable PCB compatible with 3 and 5 pin switches, a polycarbonate plate with flex cuts, and a silicone gasket mount. There is a switch pad, PCB foam, and another layer of foam in the case bottom. The stabilizers are plate mounted, and there is no support for PCB mounted stabilizers. There are 2 switch options, the EpoMaker Flamingo linear switch and the Wisteria linear switch. The keycaps are double-shot PBT in a cherry profile and are not shine-through. Backlighting is full south-facing RGB and can be controlled with key commands and in the customization software. Customization is done with EpoMaker driver software, which is available on Windows and Mac OS. Features include basic remapping, macro creation, backlighting controls, as well as customization for the optional LCD screen. The RT65 is available from EpoMaker and on Amazon for $69.99 US. All right, now let's get into some pros and cons for the RT65. First up, let's talk about the wireless connectivity here. It is solid, or it was solid for me, and you've got 2.4 GHz with 1000 Hz polling as well as your Bluetooth connections. So those options are always good to have that many connections, and it was stable for me at normal distances. Both the 2.4 GHz and Bluetooth were stable connections for me, and switching between them is not complicated. I appreciate the lack of multiple steps here. When it's in the on position, of course, then you've got your key commands to go between your 3 Bluetooth and your 2.4 GHz, so nice and simple. The next pro is having customization available. The RT65 uses EpoMaker's driver software, which is available for both Windows and Mac. I do prefer having firmware that has VIA support for remapping and creating macros. The driver software is not bad. It's far from the worst customization software out there. I also appreciate that EpoMaker has included the LCD screen customization in the same app. I like that at least it's an all-in-one type of deal. Besides remapping your keys and creating macros and customizing the screen, you also have settings for controlling the backlighting and some additional settings like controlling how long it takes your wireless connection to time out and go to sleep, which has a longest setting of 60 minutes. Another pro for me has to do with the sound, and whether you like the actual sound is subjective, of course. That's up to your personal taste, but I do count the lack of negative sounds here as a pro. The RT65 doesn't have any significant negative sounds out of the box. The stabilizers really don't have any type of excessive rattle. The sound with the Flamingo switches doesn't have any ping. There's not much in the way of any hollow type of sound, which you can get with an all plastic keyboard. Overall, the fact that it doesn't really require any tuning or modifications to sound normal, to sound good, is a pro. The keycaps are also nice quality, and I count them as a pro. They are double shot PBT. The double shot is a nice full layer, which is nice and thick. The legends are nice and crisp and consistent across my set of keycaps here, and they do have a little bit of PBT texture to them. The cherry profile is definitely a crowd pleaser, more so than the MDA profile that came on the RT100. So overall, the keycaps are a pro, unless of course you're looking for a keyboard that comes with shine-through keycaps. However, the south-facing RGB here wouldn't illuminate most shine-through keycaps very well anyway. Now, since I mentioned those Flamingo switches, let's round out the pros here by talking about those. The Flamingos that came in my sample here, they're still nice. I've had Flamingo switches in several EpoMaker keyboards at this point, and they're still good quality. No issues with spring pings or other bad sounds. They're pretty smooth feeling. I would say from one switch to the next, there's, very slight variance in the factory lube, but nothing horrible. Now we're gonna move into the neutral category, where we talk about things that are either just too subjective to call a pro or a con, or maybe they kind of have both a pro and a con aspect that washes itself out. Now, first, as we usually do, we'll talk about the design. This is one of those keyboards that has some unique features in terms of the visual design, but it's also not like super out there. The sides have a bit of a curve, just like the RT100, and this color option has kind of a retro look to it. The RGB accent light is pretty large across the top here. Of course, you can turn that off if you don't like to have it on. You have the optional screen, of course, as well. I like that they did not make this a permanent attachment in case it's something that you don't want to use. You just simply remove the cover here, take out your 2.4 gigahertz receiver, and there's a little USB-C port in there, so you just snap in the screen. And if you don't want to use it, you just pop it off, and it's not leaving a hole there because you've got this cover. So I do appreciate that they made it optional. There are only two minor things I would change in terms of physical aspects here. That would be the lack of fold-out feet for additional typing angles, and something about this little attachment area where the screen goes. So when you're using the screen, you have to remove the 2.4 gigahertz receiver from the little storage spot there. So if you're not using this, if you're using Bluetooth or the wired connection, now you just have to put this somewhere else where you might lose it. All right, moving on, let's talk about the typing feel in the neutral category here. It's somewhere between firm and flexible. As you can maybe see on the overhead shot, there's a little bit of flex here when I press down, but I am pressing down pretty hard. In your average typing action, you're not gonna actually see movement. It does have a gasket mount and a flex cut polycarbonate plate, which normally adds up to a fair amount of movement and flex, but the PCB is not flex cut, and the silicone gaskets don't really offer a lot of up and down movement. So it's definitely not a bouncy or super flexible feel. However, it's also not really firm like a top mount, so it's sort of in between. All right, I do want to mention one thing about the switches in the neutral category here, and it's actually not about the Flamingo switches, it's about the switch selections or the switch options. There are only two switch options, and they are both linear. So if you know that you like tactile or you prefer tactile switches, you would have to get your own switches and swap them out. So I just wanted to mention that. It's not inherently a pro or a con because it totally depends on what your preferred switch is. Now, I might as well mention in the neutral category a couple of inherent things about a 65% layout. You, of course, do not get a function row with this layout, and you have a limited set of nav keys, which on the RT65 are page up, page down, and delete. Different manufacturers kind of do their own thing when it comes to the nav keys on 65% layouts. Some include as few as 2 keys for your nav keys, such as the Keychron Q2 Max, and others include 4 nav keys like the Monsgeek M7, and some will go with 3 like the RT65. There's really nothing to say pro or con about this, it's just a matter of whether this layout works for you. Now, the last thing for the neutral category is the joystick. The inputs you get in the default mode are similar to an encoder knob. You get left and right is your volume up and down, pushing it in is mute, and up and down are actually next or previous tracks for music control. But when you hold down function and press the joystick, it goes into mouse mode and it becomes a movement control for your cursor. So when you move it around, obviously it's moving your cursor around, and when you press it, it functions as a left click. It's pretty neat, and I tried using it a little bit with Photoshop for some smaller adjustment, but it is a little bit clunky. So ultimately it's not something I would personally use all the time, but it is kind of neat to have. You might be able to find, a better use case for it. I just didn't really find a great case where I thought it was better than using my mouse. All right, now let's talk about a couple of cons for the RT65. Now, the main con that I experienced here is the battery life. The battery capacity, the battery cell that's in here is 3000 milliamp hour, which is smaller than the one in the RT100. That one had a 5000 milliamp hour battery in it. Now, if you don't use the screen or any of the lighting, the battery life is not bad. It's pretty respectable. But when I used it in 2.4 gigahertz mode with the screen and the accent light on, but not the backlighting, I turned the backlighting off and just left the accent light and the screen on, I really only got 2 and a little bit into the next work day of time before it was down to just 1 bar of the indicated battery life. So that was a little disappointing. It was about 18 hours of total actual active use time and then 2 overnights where it was just, in sleep mode. So that's not the greatest in terms of the competition these days. That life would go down if I did have the rest of the backlighting on. And like I said, it would be better if you don't use the screen or any of the lighting whatsoever. Now, the last 2 cons I have are pretty minor things, especially when we consider the price of the RT65, but I'll still mention them. So first, the 2.4 gigahertz connection has a bit of a noticeable lag when your computer and your keyboard are both asleep. So I would take a break, come back after a little while, computer's asleep, keyboard's asleep. The first press just didn't seem to would wake up the keyboard, but the computer seemed to do nothing. It would have to hit the key a couple times, wait a couple seconds, and then the computer would wake up. It was just a little bit of a longer lag than I've experienced with some other keyboards that I've tested. So definitely not a deal breaker, but I just wanted to mention that. The last thing is that the RT65 feels a little bit light. In terms of weight, actually. It's enough that on the right surface, the right desk mat surface, it can actually move around a little bit more than what I would call average. Now, it does have grippy feet on there, but those grippy feet, if it's on a hard surface like this or the actual wood desk surface, those grippy feet do a pretty good job of keeping it in place. It's not really going to move around from your average, just types of movement that you have. So that's it for the cons. At a price of $70 or even lower on Amazon, because I saw a discount when I looked recently, there's really not that much to complain about with the RT65, except for that slightly disappointing battery life. Ultimately, if you like a 65% layout and you like this design, it's not a bad value for the price. There definitely could be a couple things that rule it out, though. If you're looking for just excellent battery life or more premium materials, or if QMK firmware is really high on your priority list, then it would not be the best choice. If you're looking for a 65% layout in this same price range, but more of a traditional design, and you're still okay with a plastic build, then I would recommend taking a look at the Aula F65, which you can get from both EpoMaker and on Amazon. It's also all plastic, but the quality is nice for the price, and it's got a little bit more of a solid feel to it and that more traditional design. I tested the F99, the larger one in that series. I really like the quality for the price. So that'll do it for this video. Let me know what you think of the RT65. Let me know if you got one for yourself and how you're liking it. Don't forget to subscribe to the Semi-Pro Tech and Gear channel. And while you're here, why don't you check out one of these videos? I know you'll enjoy it. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.